Hello and welcome to the final video in the series of tips for higher performance in less time at the U.S. Army Commanding General Staff Officer course. In this final video, I'll be talking about the X100 oral exam, how I aced it, and what you can do to ace it as well. I will not be talking about the written exam for X100. If you watched the earlier video on taking the online test, it's the same principle applies. If you did your homework on each test, you will have created a repository on Mendeley of every reading in Command and General Staff Officer course. At that point, when you're taking the X100 test, just go to your top level folder in Mendeley instead of individual classes, and you'll be able to search the entire course with one search bar. For the X100 oral exam, it's important to stay focused on stuff that actually might come up, and then I'm advocating that you use mnemonics to help you remember things. So what is a mnemonic and how can it help you? In this case, a mnemonic is just a pattern of letters to assist in remembering something. Here's the example here of the PEMDAS of remembering the order of operations for math. In this case, you're going to be remembering things like the principles of joint operations. So if we go back to Mendeley, and we're looking at one of our lists, keep an eye out for things like this as you're reading through courses during CGSOC. Also, infographics are really good. Just make a note. Mendeley, if you find something good, add a note right here. And then when you're coming back to these things, all these notes will show up in this note pane right here, and you can jump right to it when you're creating a study guide for X100. So here I've got the principles of joint operations, and I want to remember all of them using a mnemonic. So the way I do that is I look at the first letter in each of these phrases and bullet points. For things that are multiple words like unity of command, I'm just going to use the U. And so let's go down the left-hand column here, O-O-M-M-E-U, and then the right-hand column, S-S-S-R-P-L. Okay, so now I've got the first letter on each of these bullets. I'm going to select all by Control A, and then I'm going to cut it with Control X, and then I'm going to go to what's called a Scrabble word solver and a multiple word anagram solver. I'll include links to these websites in the video's description, but you can just Google those phrases to find something. So first I'm going to start with the Scrabble word finder. My hope is that I can find a single reasonable word that gets all these letters. I have more than 9 letters, but I did find super moms. Okay, so that's a good start. I can get most of these into a long, easy to remember mnemonic, but I didn't get them all. So this is where you would turn to the multiple word anagram solver. I'm going to put the same list of words holding the control key and pressing V. And now I can select minimum letters I want in each possible word and maximum number of words. In this case, I'm just going to accept the default settings, find anagrams. And now I know from using the Scrabble word solver that supermom is one of my longer words. So I'm going to look in the results to see where supermom might come up. And what I find here is I actually have 1 2-word anagram that's pretty easy to remember. Supermom loss. So you can think maybe Wonder Woman lost a fight or something. She didn't quite use the principles of joint operations and went in the fight by herself, and she lost. So supermom lost. That's how I can remember that. So I'm going to copy this anagram, go back to my word. I'm using Control C, Control V to copy and paste things. So supermom loss. And now I've got my mnemonic. So what I want to do is, now that I've made that, I'm going to whip out my trusty 3x5 card. And on one side, I'm going to write principles of joint operations, and on the other side I'm going to write out supermom loss, just the letters to begin with, and then I'm going to fill out next to each letter what each one stand for. So I have objective, offense, mass, maneuver, economy, force. You get the picture. So now I've got one side which is my prompt, the other side which is my answer, and you do that for anything that looks like this, a list from the coursework. When you're done, if you're anything like me, you'll have a stack of 3x5 cards about 1 inch deep, which seems like a lot and impossible to memorize, but 6-pack of beer and a weekend, you can definitely make that packet of 3x5 cards going through. all these sort of boxes from your readings. And then at that point, you separate these cards into 3 piles. As you go through, look at the prompt side, see if you can remember it. If you recall it just fine, no help, put that in the easy pile. If you have no clue and you can't even really remember what it is, much less remember the mnemonic, put that into the hard pile. And then anything that's in kind of between those 2 extremes, put it into the middle pile. At that point, just focus on your hard pile at first. Make sure you can get through and actually remember those mnemonics. Once your hard pile gets smaller and smaller, move them into the middle once you feel pretty comfortable with them, or possibly even in the easy pile. And their goal here is to move things so that way you don't even have a hard pile anymore, work through your middle pile of moderately difficult stuff, and eventually get everything into the easy pile. Chances are you'll always have a little bit in that moderately hard to remember pile, all the way up until the moment you walk into the X100 exam. That's okay. Actually, I personally found it pretty useful leading right up into the exam where you're just sort of in the hallway waiting for your turn. It's a good way to burn off nervous energy, is just working through your last couple 3x5 cards of stuff that you don't quite have 100% mastered yet. Now, once you actually get into your exam, the way that you can use these mnemonics is you'll be asked a question and you repeat the question back to them, and then you're given some time to formulate your answer and then actually respond. So what I recommend you do is listen to the problem or the question, write it down verbatim, underline anything that might have a mnemonic associated with it, repeat the question back to them, make sure that you know exactly what you're being asked. Once they confirm, yep, you've got it, take each thing that you've underlined that has a mnemonic, actually write out the mnemonic, not the full thing, the actual mnemonic device. So in this case, Super Mom Loss, I'd write that. I wouldn't fill it in quite yet. I would go to my next mnemonic that might be in the question, write down that, and then once I have them all written down, then I'll use that to prompt my memory and start filling them all out. Once I've gotten all of my mnemonics filled out as best as I can, maybe you can't remember one, that's all right, don't stress, don't waste too much time trying to remember that one word. Now actually formulate a plan on how you're going to link these together and what the essence of the question is. The examiners will probably be very impressed that you can remember so much detail about what is being asked. And as long as you give a somewhat comprehensible answer in the English language, you're probably going to get an A on that question just by virtue of being able to remember the mnemonic. Make sure that you use your entire time. One mistake that I did make that bumped me down from an A+ to a lower A was that I tried to give a very concise answer and I didn't elaborate on stuff that I felt was fairly obvious. Make sure if you've got extra time, you elaborate, build off the mnemonic, and just keep talking, completely fill that time, especially if they're not really asking you any follow-up questions. The time is yours. If you give the examiners the opportunity to end early, they're tired, they want a break, they're going to take that opportunity and just give you a lower grade for stuff that they felt that maybe you didn't explicitly talk about. Even though you might feel that it's very obvious and implied, unless you verbally speak it, some of the examiners consider that they can't infer that very obvious implication. They physically need to hear you say it. So make sure you do so. With that, you should ace your X100 exam. Good luck, and don't stress out too much.